Shadow Slave. By Guiltythree. Chapter 1308, Weave. Sunny almost choked on his tea. He had grown accustomed to Anank being helpful and accommodating, so he did not expect her to become philosophical all of a sudden. Worse still, because of his own flaw, he had no chance but to answer her philosophical question. What is life, huh? He coughed. Well, I don't know. To me, life is all about being rich and comfortable. Throw a little decadence in the mix, and it's even better. If I ever manage to build such a delightful life for myself, I'll be more than happy to never improve or grow. Apart from growing fatter, that is. The old woman laughed. That is a remarkable dream, my lord. Nephi's threw a burning gaze at him at the mention of decadence, then turned to Anank. Then what about the next step? How does one become supreme? Her voice was tense. The old woman lingered for a while, then shook her head with a sigh. That I don't know. And there is no one left to teach me. I am sorry that I can't be of help. Sunny shook his head. No. You've already been very helpful. We learned a lot from you. Anank smiled. In that case, thank you for this meal, my lord and lady. I've been blessed by your grace. Rest well tonight. She rose and added, her voice tinged with melancholy, tomorrow, we sail to the center of the city. After she left, Sunny and Nephi's remained silent for a while. Both were thoughtful, pondering the startling truths of how the ancient humans walked the path of ascension before the nightmare spell. Eventually, Sunny sighed. It seems that awakening took a lot longer before, but was not nearly as fatal as it is with the nightmare spell. Nephi's nodded silently. He scratched the back of his head and added, I'm more curious about something else, though. If it is possible to awaken without the help of the spell, then why has no one accomplished just that in the waking world? Why were there no awakened in our history? She frowned. Maybe it is because the waking world has nothing to do with the dream realm, and functioned according to a different set of laws. Or maybe there were awakened in our history, but their stories have become mere myths. Nephi shook her head and added, her voice uncertain, it would also not be surprising if the possibility was there, but no one has ever managed to grasp it. After all steps except the first one, gaining the ability to sense your essence, require some kind of knowledge. Forming the core, refining essence, expanding the soul. You wouldn't be able to do it blindly. For the ancient humans of the dream realm, it was not too hard to gain that knowledge. All they had to do was observe the awakened creatures or learn directly from one of the deities. Sunny nodded. But those deities are all long dead. There were only humans in the waking world, and so, they had no one to learn from and no one to show them that there was something to be learned. Yes. It is a good theory. The theory that our world is simply different from the dream realm is also good. As well as that there were actually a few awakened in history. They're all good theories. Which one do you think is the correct one? Nephi's lingered before answering. After a while, she sighed. There's no way to tell. We still know too little about the dream realm. We also don't know how the nightmare spell infected our world, and why. But, personally, I don't buy that there has always been a connection between the two. If so, then why is the waking world so isolated, so unique? So singular? She shook her head. Why are there no similarities in the languages, the myths, the traditions? Why has there never been an awakened creature on Earth before the nightmare spell? No soul shards, no sorcery, no aspects, and no flaws. Why was there no corruption? Sunny remained silent for a while, thinking. Then, he said tentatively, maybe it was created as a sanctuary. Or an ark. If so, then perhaps it is precisely because there were no awakened, no soul shards, no sorcery, and no aspects. That there was no corruption. He shrugged with a sigh. As for the languages and myths, I don't know. To be honest, I don't really believe in that sanctuary stuff. I just said what came to mind. You are right. Our world is the only place that was drastically different from the dream realm, before the nightmare spell infected it. We don't know anything about anything, so how would we know the reason why? Sunny shook his head and rose to wash the dishes. In any case, I am tired, and it is time to rest. Where are you going to sleep? Nephi's gave him a long look. Is there a particular reason you're asking? Hearing that, he almost dropped the dirty plates. What? I just want to know which room you chose, to pick a different one. He huffed, glanced at her, and grinned. Although. But Nephi's was already standing up. Good night. A few moments later, she was gone. Sonny remained standing for a while, alone in the empty chamber. Eventually, he sighed. How come I'm the only one doing dishes? Look. The ketch was flying across the water, its sails full of wind. Sonny was standing at the bow, staring into the distance curiously. Nephi's was a few steps back, sitting on the deck with her eyes closed. Hearing his voice, she opened them and looked ahead. There, a floating city was slowly appearing from beyond the horizon. Weave. It was much larger than Sonny had imagined, with countless artificial islands connected together to form a single whole. There was a network of canals between the various districts that served as roads, and a forest of narrow towers rising into the sky. Most of them were wind catchers, just like the tower of the House of Parting was. Some blades still rotated, some were broken and still. Torn scarlet fabric fluttered in the wind. The architecture of Weave was varied, airy, and beautiful. Some buildings were constructed out of stone, some seemed to be carved of ivory, some were pavilions of sun-bleached, bright silk. There were districts with homes and houses, groves of fruit trees, and even entire city-ships taken entirely by a single elegant palace or a solemn temple. Some distance away from the residential districts, separated from them by a wide stretch of water, were vast floating fields and gardens. Bathed in the light of the seven suns, the floating city was strange and fantastical. However, neither Sonny nor Nephi's were enchanted by its dreamlike beauty. Because, above all else, Weave seemed eerie and forlorn. The tall wind catchers were still or broken. The streets and canals were empty, with no soul in sight. The groves were overgrown and wild, while the fields were desolate and empty. Some city ships were drifting apart, their mechanisms broken, while others were tilted and partially submerged in water. It was a ghost town. Strangely, though, while some buildings bore scars or had collapsed, most were intact. This was not the picture of destruction and devastation that they had imagined. Welcome to Weave, my lord and lady. Anank's voice sounded slightly mournful. It also sounded very different from before. There had been a time when her voice was weak and creaky, like dry wood. Now, it was bright and melodious like a clear stream. Right. Sonny still felt rather strange when talking to the current Anank. The old priestess. No, he couldn't even call her that anymore, because Anank wasn't old anymore. Turning around, he looked at the young woman steering the ketch. She seemed only a few years older than Sonny and Nephi's, if any. More than that, she was exquisitely beautiful. With her small stature and glistening ebony hair, dusky skin, and piercing blue eyes, Anank looked like an enchanting river spirit. Her lovely face was lively and captivating, and her disarming smile was bright enough to illuminate the world. Weird. It's weird. Sonny was deeply uncomfortable for the last couple of days because of how young Anank had become. On top of that, despite being 10 times his age, she seemed too earnest and even slightly naive. That was the person he had been calling grandmother. With a sigh, Sonny tried to shake off the feeling of incongruity and asked in a strange tone, "Haven't you told us that Weave was destroyed, Anank?" It doesn't seem damaged that terribly. The young priestess remained silent for a while, then answered with a sad smile, "There is more than one way to destroy a city, my lord." With that, she moved the steering oar and sent the ketch flying toward the central district of the eerie city of Weave, where only the wind disrupted the ghostly silence and emptiness permeated desolate streets. Chapter 1309, Mad Prince. Soon, they slowed down and entered one of the canals. Anank whispered a few words, and the sails lowered themselves. Summoning her long harpoon, she stood up and used it as a pole to push the ketch forward. As it traveled deeper into the heart of the city, Sonny and Nephi silently watched the districts that floated past. Indeed, there were no living beings here, at least none that they could see. Nephi shifted slightly. "You said that Weave was devastated by a defiled. Is that still here?" Anank slowly shook her head. "No. But I've been absent for a long time." An abomination or two could have crawled out of the river to make a nest among the ruins. It is better to be careful. Sunny and Nephi's glanced at each other and silently summoned their weapons. Just what the hell has happened here? Eventually, the ketch reached an intersection of two wide canals. Anank allowed it to drift for a dozen meters, then stopped at a small platform. There were stone steps leading from the platform to one of the central districts of the city, and after roping the ketch to a post, she lightly jumped down. Together, the three of them ascended the stairs and entered a wide plaza. It was desolate and partially submerged in water, with scars on the collapsed buildings hinting at a fearsome battle that must have taken place here a long time ago. Anank, who had been strangely reluctant to answer their questions before, finally sighed and turned to face them. The defiled that destroyed Weave visited us almost half a century ago. However, the city did not die until a few decades after that. Both Sunny and Nephi's looked at her in confusion. How could a city be destroyed decades after it was attacked? The young priestess remained silent for a while, then gestured to the drowned plaza. This is where the battle ended, and the slaughter started. I've told you before that outsiders are vital to the existence of the river people. They are the oldest and most powerful among us. They are also the only ones who can travel unimpeded across the river. Without them, the cities would become completely isolated from each other. Well, that doesn't really apply to this city of exiles, since we were always on our own. She looked down. But since Weave is located close to the desolate future, we had to constantly defend ourselves from powerful corrupted. The elders were the only ones who could pursue and eradicate them, otherwise, those horrid creatures could come and go as they pleased, retreating when wounded to attack again. And again, and again. So, that was how the defiled destroyed our city. Anank gazed at the drowned plaza with a grim expression. He simply killed every outsider in Weave. After the elders were gone, the rest of us were slowly driven to extinction. Some died fighting the corrupted, some succumbed to sorrow and despair. The less of us there were, the harder it was to keep those who remained alive. A blow after blow. A disaster after disaster. Eventually, despite all my efforts, Weave was no more. The young priestess took a deep breath and turned to them with a sad smile. The ships and the buildings remain, but without the people, they are just an empty shell. She took a deep breath. My lord, my lady. I told you that we must come here to gather supplies, but that was not entirely true. To be honest. I just wanted you to see Weave, at least once. So that someone would remember it, remember us, even when the ships and the buildings are gone, too. Sunny felt his chest becoming heavy, but Nephi seemed to be affected more. Her face was motionless as usual, but there was a hint of darkness in her eyes. Taking a step forward, she placed her hand on Anank's shoulder and gently squeezed it. She must have seen herself in the young priestess. The priestess of the nightmare spell. In a city built by the followers of Weaver, that title must have carried incredible weight. It was very likely that Anank had suddenly become the ruler of the decimated Weave after all the elders were slaughtered by the defiled. Only to see it wither and die, no matter how hard she fought to save it. Just like Nephi's had watched the village she built be swallowed by the darkness in the second nightmare. Until she was the only one left alive, just like Nephi's had been the only one to survive. Anank patted Neph's hand and smiled. It is all right, my lady. Ah. It happened a long time ago, anyway. The corner of Sunny's mouth twitched. Looking away, he asked in a perfectly even tone, that defiled. He must have been strong. If the outsiders were the most powerful among you, then not just any creature could have killed them all. Still. Just in case I get a chance to meet him one day. Is there a way I can recognize him? I'm going to kill that bastard. The young woman lingered for a while, then sighed. Yes, my lord. It was not just any defiled, indeed. The one who came to Weave is infamous enough that even we had heard of him. It was the Mad Prince. He frowned. The Mad Prince. Anank nodded. He is called Mad Prince, or the Prince of Madness. That fiend is one of the 6 plagues. She shivered and looked away, as if suddenly uneasy. The 6 plagues are not the most powerful of the defiled, and neither are they the most ancient. However, they are the most feared and loathsome. Mad Prince, Soul Stealer, Undying Slaughter, Torment, Devouring Beast, and the most harrowing of them all. The Dread Lord. Everyone on the great river has heard their names. They are also called the heralds of the estuary, sometimes. The young priestess frowned. Some even say that the Dread Lord is the true ruler of Verge, and that all defiled submit to his commands. If so, maybe he was the one who sent the Mad Prince to weave. I doubt it, though. I am not sure if that thing can be controlled by anyone, so he must have come of his own accord. Nephi's, who had been listening silently for a while, suddenly asked in a steady tone, "The Dread Lord is said to be the ruler of defilement. What about the first seeker? What power do he and the other 5 plagues possess? What rank and class are they?" Anank smiled helplessly. "I am sorry, my lady. Weave is far away from the other human cities, so whatever news used to reach us was vague and fragmentary. The first seeker. No one had seen him in a long, long time. Some say that he has turned into a mindless mass of rotting flesh because of the defilement. Some say that he was severely wounded by the Serpent King and is yet to recover. Some say that the Dread Lord has subjugated and imprisoned him." She lingered. "As for the 6 plagues, we knew very little of them. The Soul Stealer is said to possess the ability to wear the skin of those he kills. The devouring beast is immensely ferocious and feeds on human flesh. Torment is known for subjecting her victims to harrowing torture. Undying slaughter is eternally consumed by insatiable bloodlust. The Dread Lord. No one has ever survived facing him, so his powers are unknown." The young priestess smiled bitterly. "I can tell you about the Mad Prince, though. He is a raving lunatic who seems to be as murderous as he is tormented by his own madness. He looks human, or at least human-shaped. His clothes are tattered, and his face is a mass of scars, which look to have been inflicted by his own nails. He is said to wear a tarnished crown, but I haven't seen it myself. At first glance, he appears rather pitiful. However, beneath that ragged surface hides a vile and hateful monster." She gritted her teeth and looked at the scarred buildings surrounding the plaza. "His powers are that of a sword saint. But his swordsmanship is as mad as he is himself. It is violent and utterly chaotic, yet cruel and savagely lethal. He finds joy in tormenting his victims, then grows indifferent to their pain the next moment. The most terrifying thing about him, though, is that his madness spreads like a disease. Other than that, perhaps I did not even get to see his true power. He tore our elders apart with just his blade, as if they were weak children." Nephi's glanced at her own sword, then asked somberly, "What about his rank and class?" Anank lowered her head. "It was hard to tell. He is of the corrupted rank, I think. As for his class, I am almost certain that he is a Titan." Chapter 13:10, Forsaken. A corrupted Titan. Sonny's face grew dark. The memories of Falcon Scott flashed in his mind, bringing with them a bitter taste. It was another city that had been destroyed by a corrupted Titan, even if the scale and swiftness of destruction was different. He remained silent for a few moments, then asked quietly, "Aren't Titans usually huge?" Anank hesitated, then shrugged. Her azure eyes were crestfallen. "Most are. But some aren't. More than that, the defiled. They were humans once. Their path to profane power is unique." He nodded, feeling a deep sense of unease. A corrupted Titan. If one of these 6 plagues was indeed as powerful as the winter beast, then just how terrifying the Dread Lord would be. Still, Sonny felt a dark and scathing desire to kill that Mad Prince. It was strange, really. He had met all kinds of horrid nightmare creatures, but knowing that the Mad Butcher who destroyed Weave had been a human once filled him with dark wrath. Just how low can a person fall? Odious. The Mad Prince, whoever he had been before succumbing to corruption, was simply odious. Such a vile creature had no right to exist. Sonny gritted his teeth, thinking about how many of the abominations he had slain in the past were former humans as well. After thousands of years of corruption, the distinction was all but erased, but here in the nightmare, it felt different. Nephi's, meanwhile, had another question. Looking at the forlorn vista of Weave with a frown, she hesitated for a few moments, then asked softly, "Anank, you said that the outsiders were the most powerful warriors of your city. The Mad Prince easily killed them all. Wouldn't that mean that he could have killed all the Riverborn, as well? Why did he spare you?" Sunny grimaced. He was asking himself the same questions, but didn't want to speak it aloud in fear of hurting the young priestess more than she had already been hurt. Anank remained silent for a while, her head lowered. Eventually, she took a breath and said quietly, "Maybe he wanted us to suffer longer. Maybe he needed us to live some more, for whatever reason. Maybe he simply did not care. The Riverborn. He did kill some. However, then, he stayed his sword and kneeled in front of the girl he spared. She was a child who had just recently arrived from the House of Youth. He asked her a question, then left." Sunny and Nephi's looked at each other somberly. She asked, "What did the defiled ask?" The young priestess lingered, then slowly shook her head. He asked her, "Do you wish to live?" She said that she did. Hearing that, the mad prince burst into laughter, wiped his bloody sword on her tunic, and disappeared. He never returned, and since all our elders were dead, we never heard about him again. Insane bastard. Sunny frowned, remembering the piece of flotsam that he had drifted on for the first couple of days in the nightmare. It was a tenuous connection at best. But why had the mad prince asked the girl what she wished? Was he, perhaps, the lunatic who had carved the frantic runes into the ancient wood? If so, then maybe the 6 plagues had already become 5. Considering that the piece of flotsam had seemed like a fragment of a destroyed vessel, the defiled titan might have perished in a battle with one of the harrowing nightmare creatures upstream. That said, there was a very troubling thing about connecting Sunny's improvised raft to one of the defiled from Verge. There were letters of the waking world alphabet among the runes, too. How the hell would Mad Prince know them? Damnation. It was all too eerie and mysterious. Shaking his head, Sunny took one last glance at the drowned square. The fierce battle that had taken place here must have fractured the foundation of the artificial island, which was why it became flooded. He sighed and turned to Anank. "We still have to gather supplies, right?" She nodded. Sunny pulled the young woman away from the square and said in a soft voice, "Then show us around, Weave. We can get them on the way." Anank smiled a little, while Nephi's threw him a grateful glance over her shoulder. "If Anank wants us to remember her city, then it's the least we can do. I'll make sure to write a detailed research paper after returning to NQSC, so that everyone in the waking world could learn about it, too." Sunny smiled. "You know, Anank, I am a well-respected professor in the future." She looked at him with a hint of confusion in her azure eyes. "Eh, professor?" He nodded. "A teacher. I teach young awakened how to survive and provide for themselves in the wilderness. At the most famous academy in the world, no less. However, our knowledge of the intricacies of surviving in marine environments is not that extensive. I am sure I will gain a lot from learning about Weave. Then, I'll be able to teach my students about it, as well. They'll be thanking me with tears in their eyes." The young priestess seemed more confused than touched. Sunny frowned. "What is it?" She shook her head slightly. "No, it's nothing." "But, my lord, aren't you a food merchant in the future? How can you also be a teacher?" The corner of Sunny's mouth twitched. He remained silent for a few moments, then answered stoically, "Learned people also have to eat, don't they? That's just how great I am. Respected academic, renowned warrior, accomplished military commander, thriving entrepreneur. I am the picture of a perfect gentleman." Anank looked at him, then nodded with bright sparks in her azure eyes. "My lord is amazing." As Sunny grinned, Nephi's added under her breath, "And so very modest." His grin dimmed, but only for a moment. Nodding energetically, Sunny agreed. "Indeed, amazing is a word that can be used to describe me." They traveled across Weave to collect everything needed for the long journey ahead. Even after long years of being abandoned, the city still seemed to be in a relatively good shape. However, beneath the beautiful surface, it had already started to crumble. Sunny knew that Weave was not going to exist for much longer. Maybe in a decade or two, the floating city was going to break apart and be swallowed by the currents of the Great River, disappearing forever under the waves. Before it did. And necessities that one would need to travel the Great River. There were items, as well. The weapons and armor that the people of Weave had. They gathered fruit from the wild groves and other supplies from various caches that Anank had established throughout the city. There was food, spices, wine, tea leaves, and necessities that one would need to travel the Great River. There were items, as well. The weapons and armor that the people of Weave had crafted and used were of inferior quality to the powerful memories that Sunny and Nephi's wielded, but they were able to collect a lot of things that would make traversing the tomb of Ariel easier, from simple blankets and cutlery to fishing nets sturdy enough to capture nightmare creatures and sail repair kits. Everything went into the covetous coffer. As they moved from one district to another, Anank also shared stories of Weave and its people with them. How they lived, what rituals they observed, what passions drove them, and what vices they sometimes succumbed to. There were interesting details about the everyday lives of the river people and entertaining anecdotes. Sunny really learned a lot from hearing these stories, and the more he learned, the more amazed he became. Their world was so different from anything he knew, and so, they had adapted to its strange circumstances with the tenacious ingenuity inherent to all humans. Their knowledge of how to survive on the Great River had been built over many generations of persistent, relentless learning and unceasing improvement. Humans were the most adaptable of species, indeed. When Anank started to tell them about Weave, there was a shadow of sadness in her eyes. However, as she remembered the people from her past, they gradually grew bright and warm. A sweet smile appeared on her lips. But the more the young priestess spoke, the more despondent Sunny became. He hid his expression and stared at the empty streets of the desolate city, his own eyes veiled by somber darkness. It's unfair. Anank had been nothing but kind to them, so it was unfair. Sunny and Nephi's were going to leave Weave to travel into the distant past and challenge the nightmare, but she could never leave. Because she was riverborn. After guiding the two of them as far as she could, the young priestess was going to return to the crumbling city. And live the rest of her life here, alone and forsaken. Sunny's heart was heavy, and his hatred of the mad prince burned darker. Looking away, he gritted his teeth. Curse that vile bastard.